I'm introducing a woman called Anna Zobnina. Where are you, Anna? Is that? That's Anna over there. She is the director of, I need to say this, the European Network of Migrant Women. And it's to protect, defend and promote the right of refugee and migrant women in Europe. So here is an excellent woman, Anna.
I'm sorry, I didn't realize it will be so official and you're standing on a podium with a microphone.
She wanted me to say I'm the best.
No, she wanted me to give her a long biography and I just said, say I'm the best, that's enough. Actually, I'm going to continue maybe where Julie stopped, because what she said, that it is an absolute violation of women's rights and children's rights. This is the work of our network. So we work with migrant and refugee women. We work for migrant and refugee women. I myself, I live in Scotland and Edinburgh, and I'm from Russia. But our network, the main office is in Brussels, and we have member organizations across 23 European countries. And we're also a member in a global coalition for the abolition of surrogate motherhood. They work specifically on the issues of surrogacy only, whereas our remit is much wider. Last year, we wanted to do a research together because we know that in Europe, in some countries, it's 100%, in some countries it's 90 or 70%. It is migrant women and women of migrant background who are exploited in prostitution. We're an abolitionist organization. We advocate for the Nordic model. We're also part of the European campaign called Europe Free from Prostitution. We do look at surrogacy through the same lens and through the same analysis as we would analyze the institution of prostitution. We do not have so much knowledge or the factual data and research done at the European level. There is a lot of anecdotal evidence and stories, and we have criminal cases, but there is no actual comprehensive research and reports published. So this is what we wanted to do, and the reason we wanted to do it is because, and it's really important to be aware of this, there is a big preparation at the global level and at the European level to legalize surrogacy. There are laws in the making. They're working on it right now. They're not consulting women. They're not consulting women's rights organizations. They're not consulting organizations that are concerned with questions of motherhood or parents. It is being lobbied, like we're familiar how the transgender lobby works, for example. It's a very similar tactics, but also very similar representatives of who is doing this. So I can give you one example. For example, in 2019, in the Council of Europe, which is not the European Union, but the Council of Europe, there has been a proposal for a resolution to legalize surrogacy. And again, as Julie said, there is very little distinction between commercial and altruistic or voluntary, however they call it. And even on paper, when they write it in such a way, they word it that it's impossible to make a distinction because, okay, the woman is she's not being paid directly, but she's being compensated for her expenses. So she is being paid, but there is no a contract that she gets paid so much and then she delivers the baby. So it has just a little bit different legal look. So the resolution was tabled in 2019, and it failed largely because of the efforts by the French radical feminists who mobilized against this resolution, maybe because it is in Strasbourg as the seat of Council of Europe, they're a little bit closer to it, but they're also monitoring these processes very well. There is a very strong movement against legalization of surrogacy in France. It has been for a long time. But who tabled the resolution? It was a man who identifies as a transgender woman, who is right now the Deputy Prime Minister of Belgium, Petre de Sutter. And this person has been always interested in surrogacy. And we can name names, and I don't like name names, but we have to do it. We really have to know those people by name. We have to know them by face. And we also form it becomes very clear. As Julie said, gay men are the face, and that's true, but they're also very instrumental in pushing directly within institutions. They sit in specific positions, and so are those individuals who identify as transgender. So this is just one example. It was a big resolution. It came from a specific person. This specific person has a history of, he was a gynecologist himself, and he has, yeah, it's kind of comes really creepy because he then decided that he was a woman, but also he has, like, you know, when you start doing the investigation, you look into in which committees this person is, and then you find them in the committees of relationship with India or with Ukraine, or being in charge with unaccompanied refugee minors. And we know, for example, unaccompanied refugee minors, and this person is from Belgium, and there is a very strong colonial relationship with Congo. And I mean, then it becomes really, really, it doesn't look nice at all. It's very difficult to speak about this because this is obviously, you know, unless you have a really concrete evidence to what you're trying to prove. But partly that's the reason why we wanted to do this research, which is not about any individuals, but we wanted to document the patterns of exploitation of a specific group of women who would be migrant or refugee women. So it's our group of women that we work with. It doesn't mean that surrogacy or reproductive exploitation affects only migrant women, but we wanted to see what the connections are between the movement of women across the border, because we know there are links, obviously, between trafficking and migration. And this is not to say that every migrant or refugee is a trafficked person, but we know that along the same routes, traffickers are organizing, and we know that, you know, Nigerian women constitute the largest identified group of victims of trafficking in Europe, for example. So this is what we wanted to look at, and when we did the research, and it was mostly desk research, but we did a lot of publications, kind of research, the police reports. We contacted state authorities and asked them to answer questions. And what transpired in the end, that we kind of identified or mapped several patterns of reproductive exploitation that happens in relation to migration. The first one is probably the most obvious one that we can think about, is when a woman is being trafficked literally for the purposes of exploitation and surrogacy. So she can be, for somebody to be categorized as a victim of trafficking, you need to have a very complicated set of details that all come together. There has to be recruitment. There has to be position abuse of something. For example, abuse of position of power, abuse of position of vulnerability, a deception or force. Usually they like to look at force. They wouldn't look into, okay, she was just illiterate and has a history of sexual abuse, and she couldn't understand the language, and when she signed the contract, she didn't know what she was signing. The police, they don't like to look at this kind of vulnerability factors. They're looking, oh, was she beaten up? Was she in chains? Was she trying to escape? You know, it's a little bit the attitude that we have also in cases of rape. Like, did she kick back? Did she scream? And so on. So, the one most obvious pattern of reproductive exploitation that we saw is indeed when woman is being trafficked, most often not by force, nobody kidnaps her. It's economic dependency, and sometimes women enter into those arrangements, at least seemingly voluntarily, but really when you deep digger at both the motivations of the women and whether they understand what they are entering into, in most cases, women do not have a clear idea. And of course, nobody informs them about the health consequences, about the consequences they might have from their community, because there is a lot of stigma as well. So this is one set of cases. The other set of cases is when women, they already migrated, or maybe they were refugees, and maybe they were fleeing some specific situation, poverty or war or violence from men, which is very often the root cause for migration of women. And then they find themselves in a situation when most of the time it's economic and legal dependency, and they're being identified and targeted, and they become the surrogate mothers, and they fall into this dependency, not just dependency, I mean, there are legal restrictions. When women sign those contracts, then they're prevented from moving, for example, from one place to another. They have to follow a specific diet. They cannot have an abortion. They cannot change their mind. I mean, it depends on which jurisdiction this is happening. Which brings me to the third pattern, is when women are moved from one jurisdiction to another. So, for example, they can recruit a woman in one country. She's transported to a second country to be impregnated, and then she's transported to a third country where they place her in a clinic where she will gestate the baby, and then they can bring her back to the country of origin so that she gives birth there. Or they can, so sometimes it's 2 or 3, pardon? Yes, it depends whether this would be actually defined as a trafficking or not. In most of the cases, those women, they will not fall, as I explained. The definition of trafficking is extremely, extremely difficult to, to put in practice. The women would argue very often themselves that they agreed to this. And for trafficking to be the case legally, consent should be irrelevant. Like, this is what makes it different, trafficking from other forms of exploitation. So with these women, normally this kind of movement across countries, it would be it would be dependent on the wishes of the buyers, on the legislation, and on costs. This is the most important. Where you save most costs, like in a clinic or women giving birth, those who arrange it, the mediators, those agencies, they would move her according to their financial decisions. And then we have also cases of women where there is a multiple exploitation. So sometimes it's not the surrogacy, strictly speaking, they can recruit pregnant women, simply very poor, desperate, pregnant women who might not want to have a baby in the end, but they wouldn't have an abortion. Instead of this, they would bring a woman, like we had cases, women from Georgia, from Russia, from Latvia, who were transported to, it was Greece, and then they had to stay in a clinic there. They had to give their own babies. So basically, it was the forced adoption. They were paid, but it was a very, very little amount. And then they also harvested eggs from these women. So it was multiple exploitation in one case. It was not specifically the case of what we understand as gestational surrogacy, when they implant the egg of another woman, and she carried her own baby, and then the baby was removed from her. And this was a big kind of criminal network that was identified, and they operated across several European countries. So yeah, when we did this research and we wanted to present it to the European legislators, because the argument, at least in Europe or in the European Parliament, is, I mean, first of all, it's not really happening, this kind of exploitation. Something may go wrong, yes, there are sometimes consequences, but give us an example where nothing ever goes wrong. These are the arguments that they use. That women, of course, choose it. Women like it. I mean, there's the whole industry. There are these advertisements of those happy, elated women who just want to give birth for other people because that's what makes them happy. And then all those agencies that are called happy families and so on. So these are the main voices of the industry that we have speaking to the parliamentarians, for example. And so right now, for example, the European Parliament has a proposal for a legislation that if you look at it at the surface, it's not about surrogacy. It's about the right of transnational parents. Well, we know whenever there is a word transnational parent, there will be surrogacy somewhere. We know that now at the EU level, whenever there is an abbreviation SRHR, sexual and reproductive health and rights, which normally, traditionally should be women's sexual and reproductive rights, especially reproductive rights, we know that if we have to read texts very, very carefully, and we will find somewhere that there is a right to surrogacy, to recognition. I mean, first of all, how they call it, artificial insemination, but there's a more like an umbrella term. Reproductive technologies, this is how they call it. And you don't really know what is there. I mean, it can be anything. And this is why they described it in such general terms, because then necessarily you will find surrogacy there. And the main argument also is that they need to protect the rights of children. This is the most tricky one, because they would say, so okay, now we have a baby already. So for example, take Italy. In Italy, surrogacy nationally, it's banned, like in many European countries. But you can go to Ukraine, of course, and you can go to Colombia, and you can go to other countries, and you can literally buy a baby there. You can select from a catalog, you can select the women, you can select the conditions, and then the government would say, okay, but the baby is already here. What do we do? Is the baby going to be stateless, without parents? We have to. So there is a question of legal recognition of those babies that were born through surrogacy. And the argument is that it's like, it's like with prostitution when they say, well, it's already here, so if it's here, why don't we legalize it? Rather than extending the legislation to ban those persons who can be couple, who can be single, and a lot of them are gay men, from purchasing babies in other countries. So the solution is, no, let's just decriminalize and legalize it. And we have, for example, in Norway, the Nordic model on prostitution, which actually criminalizes sex buyers even when they engage in these transactions outside of Norway. So the legislation extends, as long as they're citizens of Norway. If they go to Thailand and they want to go into a brothel and they're caught, which of course never happens, but the point is that there is law, and our argument that instead of softening your law to accommodate the market that is taking hold of women's vulnerabilities, you need to extend your legislation so that you punish those citizens of your country who want to engage in buying babies in other countries just because they're poor and vulnerable women. So yeah, this is currently what's happening, like at the European level, but of course, UK is no longer in the EU, so this is not going to be, like the EU level is not maybe going to affect, but we have the Council of Europe level, where, as I said, there was before the proposal for legalization of surrogacy, and then we have the international level. So the UN level is really probably, a lot of you know what's happening now with like erasure of women. A lot of it comes from the UN level. If you look at the documents like Yoga Carta principles, it has surrogacy there inside. It's written the right, this kind of right to have children. And of course, there is no legal right in international law to have a child. You have a right to create a family. You have the right to divorce. You have the right to inherit, the citizenship, so that the women are not discriminated when they give birth, that their children acquire the same citizenship. But there is no right to child per se. Right now, because it's quite impossible to just put it at the UN level, there's no convention or there's no law that would govern surrogacy as such. So what they're trying to go through the Hague Convention, and it's a different kind of body that deals with private law. And they are working on an international convention that would legalize surrogacy already for several years. there are very powerful and very concerned feminists who are monitoring this process. The process is very sealed. It's not, I mean, they're not inviting us for consultations. They're not asking, we just see what they publish in the end. But like the main danger, even though this is not like a legally binding instrument for everyone, and it's not a human rights law, it's a private law, but we have European legislators who are watching what is happening at this international level. They're following, and they're saying to us, well, let's see what they will say, because they know what they're doing. They're the guys, they have a special committee, they investigated this problem, they will do the best, and then we will follow them. And in the meantime, there is this proposal, as I said, in the European Parliament to, well, it's on the rights of transnational families, and the surrogacy is in there. Even though if you ask them, any parliamentarian will say, no, 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 this is, you know, it's very funny because they tell you actually, this is not what we mean. Like, this is like literally a response. In the same way, if you maybe heard, there was a recently International Commission of Jurists who published this horrible 8th of March principles. And also, it concerns sexual conduct. So these people want to decriminalize pimping. They want to decriminalize, like, according to them, children can consent to sex. It's International Commission of Jurists. They're not an intergovernmental organization. They are NGO, effectively. But they're very powerful and very influential. And I had a meeting with them, well, with one of their offices last week. And when I'm pointing out at the concrete sentences in this document, and they tell you, no, 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 that's not what we meant. I was like, what do you, I don't know what you meant. I see what's written in the document, and it says black and white, children under the age of consent can consent to sex. This is what document says. In 20 or 17 European countries, consent is 14 or 15 years old. So what does it mean? 5, 7, 10? So, I mean, and this is what they have when you try to engage with them and the arguments. Most of the time they just treat you with a lot of, I mean, they either don't speak to you at all, or they speak in a very condescending way. But the point I'm trying to make, those big, large, influential organizations, sometimes NGOs, or agencies of the European Union, they're not doing very well in terms of women's rights, and they are quite interested in legalizing all forms of commodification of female body. And surrogacy is one small element in this global commodification and disembodiment, I don't know how to call it. You know, everything is for sale, every part of the body is for sale, but of course we know women's body is different from men's body, and you can exploit it in much more profitable ways, and this is what's happening here. And it is particularly important for them to sever the link between a mother and a child. And I mean, it's not to defend this link from an essentialist perspective, but they absolutely do not want to see any kind of link. And this has legal arguments, it has financial arguments, like they would explain it from the financial perspective. They bring in the rights of the child, because this is in the best interest of the child. The manipulation of legal terms and what has been understood until now as actual human rights is quite amazing. It's just, you just see, so it's like my conversation with this commission of jurists, and when you give them concrete quotes of what is written in the document, that it's not possible to call it human rights law. It's not possible to call those things human rights principles, because they're clearly against human rights. This kind of misinterpretation and abuse of international standards, particularly standards on women's rights, is global. And the last thing I want to say, that CEDAW committee, which is very important for us, CEDAW as an international convention on the elimination of all forms of discrimination against women, and they have their own committee who observes implementation of CEDAW. They have no position on surrogacy. And we have been asking them to develop the position for several years now. In the convention itself, nothing is about surrogacy. But the convention was written in 1978. There is very little on violence against women even. But we know that there is it protects the rights of mothers, and it also protects the rights of women not to be discriminated on the basis of sex. That's the main thing. And they consistently have been trying to avoid even to engage with the issue of surrogacy, because it's too controversial, because some women choose, because we don't want to use the terms like patriarchy and so on. Yes. So, and this is the top, there is nowhere else to, like CEDAW is the top of international law on women's rights, unless we create a new law. So that's what I wanted to say, thank you.